The wind found its way between the stones of the wall and sang as it went, a sound like steel that had forgotten its maker. Jon Snow stood beneath it with his cloak tight to his throat, feeling the weight of the wall at his back like a mountain laid upon his shoulders. The torches along Castle Black licked at the air and guttered. Beyond the gate, the world was a black sheet under stars, a land of ice and silence stretching into forever. Ghost moved in that darkness like a torn scrap of moonlight, hunting nothing, circling back to Jon's boots to sniff and look up with eyes clear and red as banked coals. He was alive. The thought had settled into him like a stone cast into deep water, slow to reach the bottom, alive and wrong in some quiet way. He could not forget the feel of hands fumbling at his ribs, the cold that had entered him, the darkness that had opened its mouth and swallowed him whole. And then the voice, no words, only warmth, drawing him up out of the dark as if from a well. When he breathed now, he could taste resin and ash. When he slept, he woke with his flesh prickling, as if a fire had run beneath his skin and left embers there. Melisandre stood some paces away, as motionless as a carved figure. The snow gathered on her red wool and melted as it touched, beating water that ran and froze at the hem. Her eyes had that look they did when she was listening for distant thunder. "You feel it," she said, without turning her head. Jon did not ask how she knew. Something. His breath fogged and drifted. "I cannot say what." She lifted her face into the wind as if kissing it. "A door you have found," she murmured. "A way through. Most are dragged across it only once. But you, a fire can be banked. It dies only when it is starved. And you, Lord Snow, you've learned where the flue is." A small smile touched the corner of her mouth and vanished, leaving it no warmer. "Be careful of the habit." Davos Seaworth stood on Jon's other side, stamping his feet and pulling at his gloves. His breath billowed around the black, salt-scarred line of his beard. "The habit of what?" he said. "Staying alive?" "Of leaving and returning," Melisandre said. "Of losing little bits of yourself each time." "Lovely," Davos muttered. "That's cheered me right up." He looked to Jon. "You asked us both out here for something, my lord. Talk of doors and flues is all well and good, but the wildlings whisper and the brothers stare, and if we stand much longer we will be purple and stiff. Say what you mean to say." Jon kept his eyes on the dark. Ghost pressed his side. He felt the pull of the night the way a slope pulls a rolling stone. "I mean to go beyond," he said, and knew as he said it that it was true. "Tonight, I need to learn what waits. I need to see it with my own eyes, or I will spend every waking hour seeing it with someone else's." He turned to Melisandre. "You saw me back, twice I think. The first time when I bled out in the snow. The second was a little thing," she said. "You have learned to curl yourself around the spark. Children will shorten breath to make a game of drowning, and you have found a way to do it with life itself. Do not make it a game." "I won't," Jon said, though he knew already that some part of him would want to test the edge of it, to put his thumb on the blade and press. He looked at Davos. "I need you to hold the gate for me. Keep the watch steady in my absence. Say nothing except that I am patrolling the shadows and will return before dawn." "Return," Davos said. He stretched the word as if testing it for cracks. "Aye, if you mean to have me lie, at least give me a blessed truth to hope for." "I will return," Jon said, and the breath he took after saying it felt easier, light as the first gulp after nearly drowning. "If I don't, you'll have a corpse to burn, not a lord to bury. 7 bloody hells." Jon walked into the dark. Ghost padded beside him, silent, sure-footed. The world narrowed to the crunch and squeal of snow under boots, the iron bite of the air, the rough rhythm of his breath. The wall faded behind like a dream he had woken from poorly, not certain whether he had dreamed it or lived it. When he had gone far enough that the torches were only a rumor and the black of the trees had eaten the last soot of their light, Jon stopped at a stand of old, stunted pines bent by wind and weight. "You smell it, don't you?" he whispered into Ghost's ear, and the dire wolf flicked an ear back, his tail still, the hair along his spine lifted a finger's breadth. The cold had a shape out here, a thickness that the night inside Castle Black did not hold, as if winter itself had congealed and set. Jon leaned his back against a tree, felt the crackle of frost under the bark, and closed his eyes. He gathered himself. It was an odd thing, this new knowing. He had found it by accident the first time, in the dim hours of the night when he could not stand the thought of sleep and its hands. He had pressed himself to the fire and tried to breathe the smoke in until the heat was behind his teeth. When he let the breath out slowly, a strange stillness had come over him, as if he were lying under a blanket of snow, listening to sounds distilled through ice. His heart had slowed, then labored, then quieted. Panic had nipped him then, and he had fought his way back with a gasping and the clench of a hand in Ghost's fur. The dire wolf had howled, a long angry sound that had cut the night like a knife. And when Jon had come back, the world had been an inch brighter, sharper around the edges, and the warmth in him had settled more evenly, like a level fire. Now he went to meet that stillness with open eyes. He breathed in through his nose, slow as the world turning. He breathed out through his mouth, slower yet. He held his breath and let his heart count itself down. He thought of a forge and of old Micken's hands, thick and scarred, lifting the bellows one smooth. Time then resting. He thought of snow falling through pine boughs and the way it paused before it let go. He thought of his name, the plainness of it, the weight of it. Jon Snow, Jon Snow. He thought of the words of his vow, not as prayer but as promise. I am the sword in the darkness, the watcher on the walls. The world opened beneath him like a trapdoor. He fell a short way and then the falling stopped, but he had not landed. Ghost's weight against his side was gone. The cold was neither pain nor comfort. It simply was, as stone simply is stone. He opened eyes he did not know how to open, and saw with a sight that had nothing to do with pupils and everything to do with the way the world remembered itself. The forest was a skeleton of glass and wire. Line met line and hissed where they crossed. He could see the breath of small things and the heat of old trees, banked deep around their hearts. He saw himself leaning against a tree, mouth parted a little, lashes furred with frost, and he felt a sudden shame at the sight of his own helplessness. His tether to that body showed itself to him as a thread bright as a live coal, running from somewhere behind the breastbone to somewhere above and beyond his left shoulder. It hummed a note that made him think of the chime of the wall in high wind. Move, he thought, and moved. He had no weight. He was a kind of intention. He slid between the frozen lines of the night like a shadow that knew what it was about. When he came to the first of the dead men walking, he knew them as soon as he saw them, though he had known them before. They moved with that wrong economy, a thing that approximated grace without understanding it. The blue in their eyes was not color so much as a presence, cold pressed into a shape. Their smell was a subtraction. The breath of the forest bent away from them, unwilling to touch, and the snow under their feet did not squeal as snow should, but sank into itself as if forgetting to be snow at all. They did not see him. They saw his body. A head turned, blue light pulsing, then the head turned back. The others were not there among this small band, only corpses made to walk. Jon stood within arm's reach of one and peered into the face he had half recognized. A trapper from the Shadow Tower whose beard had been a pride and whose hands had always been clean. Now the beard was rimed and broken off in forks, and the hands dragged as if they did not understand the fingers they wore. The mouth was slightly open, and frost had feathered its teeth. Life had been subtracted here and something thinner than life had been substituted, as if a scribe had been given a burnt stick and told to copy a book written in gold. Jon moved deeper. He crossed the places he had hunted in as a boy and the places he had bled. He found a line of prints that ended in a swirl and a gap and nothing at all. He saw the work of axes in a grove of young birches where the trunks lay like bones. He saw black feathers caught in a briar, and it took him longer than it should have to know they were ravens' feathers and not crows. When at last he came to the edge of the land the wildlings called the Haunted Forest and the rest of the world called the Gut of the World, he felt a pressure like a hand on his chest. The others were there. They made no sound. The air around them was a thinner air. The patterns they made when they moved were precise the way a dance can be precise when the dancers are not men but lines of logic written by a mind that does not love. Their blades were a collection of drawn winter, edges that licked at anything near them and took the heat from it in long, clean bites. Jon stood within their gathering and felt his thread hum hard. He could not tell whether the hum was in warning or greeting. He reached his hand toward one of them in a foolish impulse to see if he could touch. The nearer other turned its head a fraction, and the blue that was its eyes settled in the space he occupied. There was no expression in that light. There was no room in it for one. The space narrowed around him as if the world had puckered. The thread at his shoulder rang now so sharply that he wanted to cry out, but he had no mouth. He drew his hand back and the pressure eased. They do not know me as a thing, he thought. They know me as a complaint. He watched them a while and knew that he learned little by watching. He had the oddest urge, sudden and childish, to die a little more, to lean farther from his tether and see whether something else would reveal itself beyond that. He gathered himself to the thought, felt for the place where the thread entered him on the non-body he wore, and pinched. His body on the ground leaned a fraction more, the way a man does when sleep catches him and his neck relaxes. The others moved with a smoothness one step short of graceful. That small step diminished the fear Jon felt. Behind the movement, behind the cold, behind the neatly worked logic of their existence, he sensed a great longing. He could not name its flavor. He knew only that it was as vast and steady as the ocean, and that it was older than the wall and had learned patience under a sky different from the sky he knew. Enough, he thought. He did not know what clock he ran by here. He withdrew his hand from the thread and found it in itself again. The world eased. He turned and moved back toward the place where his body leaned among the bent pines. He did not have to mark the way. He was the mark. Melisandre had come, he saw when he returned. She stood near his body with her fingers sunk into Ghost's ruff and her eyes closed. Davos stood beyond them. Ed Tollett had come too, his long face longer yet, his mouth set in a shape that had nothing to do with humor. The snow had deepened around Jon's boots. He remembered being given a leather strap to bite on as a boy when they pulled a sliver of glass from his heel. Bite, boy, bite hard and don't kick. He bit now on that memory and threw himself upward along the thread, into the mouth of his own throat. He came back badly, as if shoved into a too small box. He gagged and coughed, and his eyes spilled water he hadn't called for. Ghost's tongue was rough on his cheek. Melisandre's hand was on his shoulder, firm and cool, and then Davos's as well, calloused, shaking a little. Ed put 2 fingers under Jon's jaw as if measuring him for a noose. "Last time you came back like a drowning man," Ed said, relief and reproach wrestling in his voice. "This time like a man choked on a bone. I fear to ask what's left for next time. Do not speak of it as if it were a thing to play with." Melisandre's voice was quiet. "What did you see?" "What I feared," Jon said, when he had breath enough to speak. He lay a moment longer, feeling the weight of Ghost's head on his chest and the way the direwolf's lungs worked. Then he sat up carefully and made himself stand. The world felt thick, as if he were pushing through cold honey. "And something I did not expect. They are shaped. The dead walk because something instructs them. The things that instruct them are not blind. And I think they are patient." He looked into the dark. "I do not understand their end, but I see their road." Davos spat into the snow, a polite little spit as if trying not to offend the ground. "Then we must set a better road across theirs and set it quick. Words come from the hill clans that the snow falls in a manner they call witch snow. It bites deep and does not soften. We cannot wait for kings and queens to make peace before we set to this." "We cannot," Jon agreed. "We'll need dragonglass. We'll need every hand and every blade, north and south. Send riders to Winterfell. Send to the Manderleys and the Glovers and the mountain clans. Ed, take 10 and go to Eastwatch. Tell them to watch for Blue Eyes by day and Slow Snow by night. No one goes beyond alone. And send ravens to Old Town. There will be someone somewhere who remembers what the old words meant when they were new." "You're giving orders like a Lord Commander," Ed said dully. I liked you better when you were dead. But he nodded, and his humor came back like a shy dog. I'll go to Eastwatch. It'll be a delight to trade tall tales of blue-eyed corpses with men who smell of fish. And me? Davos asked. I'll carry word to Winterfell if you like. But your sister will wring my head off my neck if I arrive without you. She asked for you by name. Bring him or don't come back, she said. And then she smiled a cold northern smile that made me believe she meant it. Gods bless her. Jon closed his eyes momentarily. Sansa's letter was folded in the pouch at his belt, worn thin at the creases where his fingers had worried it while he read. He saw her script in his mind, the hand they had both learned at Winterfell. He saw, too, Ramsay's words carved into soft flesh with the blade he preferred, the knife that wrote on women. He flexed his hands until the leather of his gloves creaked. I will go to her, he said, soon. But first we must be sure the wall will stand without me. The long battle will be in the north and in the heart of every man too warm to believe in cold. If I go to Winterfell, I go not as a brother of the Watch but as a bastard son returned to a house I loved. The myths of me will be more useful here. You've got a funny notion of useful myths, Davos said, but he lowered his voice. If you delay too long, we'll have another myth on our hands. A girl with red hair and a blade of ice. I won't delay too long, Jon said, and felt the truth of it like another thread tugging him from behind his left shoulder. He sent riders. He sent ravens. He sent men with axes into the forest to cut and shape and fill the cells beneath Castle Black with wood that would burn hot and clean. He spoke to the brothers, and when he spoke he told them what he had seen without telling them what had pulled him out of himself to see it. He slept while he could, and when he could not sleep, he fed the fire in him a small breath and felt it swell and settle. When Ed left for Eastwatch, Jon walked with him to the gate and took his hand, and Ed made a joke about not wanting to shake the hand of a ghost because it would go through like smoke. Jon laughed, and Ed looked pleased and then concerned when he realized he had pleased Jon. The ravens returned. Samwell Tarly's hand was on one of the letters that came, though the boy himself was far in the south, in a city that thought it could name every star. Jon read Sam's words once, then again, and only the second time did he see beneath the breathless ink the shape of the man who had written it. Dragonglass, Sam wrote. Mountains of it under Dragonstone. Old records, stories, obsidian, and something else. A footnote in a forgotten scroll about a metal that swallowed heat and paid it back as blue. Valyrian steel. Something in the making and the singing, Sam had scrawled. Forging in a wind from the shadow. The hands that make it must have patience enough to carve their own name into water. I don't know what that means, but I knew I must send word. Jon traced Sam's name with his thumb. He thought of old songs in unlit halls. He thought of the way men will put sound on a thing so they can carry it with them and call it a word. He thought of Ghost's fur prickling against his wrist and the look of the other when it turned its head, as if something had brushed it that was not wind. He sent another raven, this time to Dragonstone. Sansa's second letter arrived a day later. There was less ink on the page and more iron in the words. She was at Winterfell. She had friends he did not expect and fewer enemies than before. The house that had killed their brother and used their father's name as a stepstool had coiled around itself, bloated on its own fear. She asked again for him to come, and this time told him two things she had not told him before. The name of those who had bent knee and might bend knee again, and the shape of Ramsay's cruelty in one particular that made Jon stop on the stair and close his eyes and stand a long time. Go, Davos said. He had a way of appearing where he was needed with an air of having always been there, like an old chair. You've done what a man can do over a handful of days. The wall will not fall because you sit a day on a horse. Your men watch. Your wolf watches half again more. Go. I was going, Jon said. They both knew he had not been. The ride south had the feel of a dream lived in a workmanlike manner. The world was made of snow and sky and the black ridges of trees. At each crofter's hut, there were 2 fewer heads than there had been last winter. At the last hearth, a boy of 6 with hair pale as the belly of a fish put his hand on Jon's knee as he spoke to his father and looked up with honest eyes that did not yet know a lord from a cook. Jon put his hand over the boy's without breaking his sentence and felt the small warmth there like a kindness he had not earned. When he came to Winterfell at last and saw the broken tower and the new timber and the smoke and the small, sturdy figures moving about as if the castle had never slept, something in his chest lifted and set and lifted again like a bird testing a wind. Sansa met him in the yard. She wore a dress cut for warmth and a cloak lined in thick fur, and her hair was bound up in a way that made her look older and calmer and less likely to forgive. They stood looking at one another while men and women around them made that sound Northerners make when they are pleased and do not want to show it. When they embraced, Jon put his face into her hair and breathed in the winter smell of it and the faint scent of smoke that always clung to Winterfell's women, and for a moment he did not feel dead at all. "You came," she said into his coat. "I said I would," he said. "Do you doubt my word?" "I have learned to doubt every word," Sansa said without bitterness. And then she leaned back and looked at his face with a study that would have shamed a learned man. "But I would like to believe yours." He wanted to tell her everything in one breath and nothing at all. Instead, he told her what men needed to hear first. "We are going to take our home back," he said. "We will do it quickly, and we will do it in such a way that no one who sees it will think it an accident. And then we will bar the doors and put the fires high, because winter's hand is behind our necks." She smiled with only the top of her mouth, the way their mother had done sometimes. "So it is," she said. "I have made friends. Some are dangerous, some are honest. Each will be useful. There are men on the hills who owe Starks more fear than love. There is a lord by the sea who thinks he is a king when he smells salt. There is a girl who once killed geese with a stick and now can kill a man without thinking if she does not like how he eats." Her eyes softened an instant. "Don't try to keep her here. She will go if she needs to. She has the look of a person who already knows where her feet will take her, no matter what you say to them." "Arya?" Jon said, the ache in the name sweet and sudden as winter apples. "Is she?" "Not here," Sansa said. "Not yet, but she will be. She came for a night, thin as a blade and twice as sharp, then went on. She left me a knife and words that were both too many and not enough. She took his arm, not as a lady takes a man's arm in a hall, but the way a sister does in a yard where too many things are watching. Come, let's lay plans." They laid plans. They held council in the great hall whose walls had heard wolves howl and kings pray and women sing over loaves and dying. The Manderleys bent their heads and made slow, fat promises that were limber enough to be believed. The Glovers set their jaws and gave their swords because they would not be the ones to say no to a Stark in Winterfell. The mountain clans sent men who looked like the rocks they lived among and smelled of smoke and leather and grease. Lyanna Mormont sat in a chair too big for her and gave answers that made old men look at the ground. Jon spoke simply and Sansa spoke precisely, and between the two of them they made a net for the room that was tight enough that the fish did not slip. Ramsay came north out of his hole with banners and tongues. He brought men who had killed and men who had wanted to, men who wore their cruelty like rings and men who wore it like shirts and did not know they had put it on. He had archers with the habit of loosing too soon, and riders who liked the sound horses made when they were frightened. Jon stood on the rise of a hill and watched the enemy form up against him across a field that the snow had smoothed into a white table. The sky was gray with low cloud and his breath hung in front of his face and went nowhere. He held Longclaw, the sword balanced in his hand as if it had grown there. Ghost stood on the rise behind him, making no sound at all. He could die here. He felt it in the way a spear feels the weight of a thrower's eye. He could die and return and set fear working in the bones of the men across the field like a worm in wood. He could make himself into a story while his flesh still cooled. The thought shamed him and tempted him at once. And beneath it, like a deeper current under a river, another thought tugged at him. He could use this new road to go where the arrows flew and the cold walked and the knives whispered, and he could bring what he had learned back into the world where men left footprints. Sansa stood at his stirrup, wrapped in wolf fur. "Do not make yourself into something they will love because you cannot stand to be what you are," she said without looking up. "You were not resurrected to put on a red cloak." "How do you know what I was resurrected for?" he said. "I don't," she said, "but I know what I need you for." I need you for victories that do not look like songs when you tell them later. I need you for standing and listening and not moving until it's time to move. That's harder. She put her hand to his boot. We are Starks. We were made to stand. In the battle that followed, Jon stood. He stood while arrows fussed at the air and cried when they died on shields. He stood while horses screamed and fell, and his men hauled riders from saddles and knocked them down like hanging meat and cut them open. He stood and watched for the moment when the silence under the noise changed. He knew it when it came, felt it as if the world had set its teeth. He lifted Longclaw, his arm steady, and the men who had eaten at Winterfell tables and grumbled at Winterfell benches and whispered in Winterfell halls leaned into their shields and moved as if the snow were water and they were ships. Jon moved last. When he did, he moved as if his bones had remembered a dance he had forgotten he had learned. Ramsay's men used their fear like flies use a window. They threw themselves at it until their wings were broken, then rested, then threw themselves again. They could not imagine another way out. Jon broke their middle with men who knew how to wheel without speaking. He cut only when he had to, and then each cut counted. Ghost ranged the rear and never tired. The wind was a hand across Jon's face, not cruel and not kind. Ramsay himself was smaller than his words, a narrow man with a shadow that squinted as if sunlight offended it. He loosed arrows when he ought to have turned his horse, and turned his horse when he ought to have dismounted and fought like a man. He had a way of moving his head that put his ear into listening just a moment before a blow, as though he could find mercy if only he heard it in time. He found none. Sansa arranged the ending. She arranged it without telling Jon how, which he took as a kindness. It was a small, bleak thing. A pebble dropped into a deep well, and then there was quiet. They burned the bodies that night on long, clean piles of wood that took and held the fire the way a good friend holds a secret. Jon stood with Sansa watching the flames. He could hear singing somewhere beyond the light. A rough, low sound that might have been any of a dozen songs, and so was all of them. Sansa's breath smoked. "Will you be king?" she asked. "I am no one's king," he said, and the words tasted wrong and right at once. "If they shout and call me so, I will spend my time telling them to shut up and sharpen their knives. The wolves know the truth of it." She nodded. "Let them call you. Let them build the thing you're not, and then be the thing you are. That will be the trick, Jon." They did call him. They did shout. The words were loud in the hall and louder in the yards and louder still in the spaces where people go to relieve themselves and talk because they think no one is listening. "King in the north," they said, drunk on victory and the rightness of being on the side that had not had to lie to itself about what it had done. Jon let them say it and did not correct them beyond the places where correction would have been foolish. He took counsel at dawn and at dusk and made himself sleep at noon when he could, and when he woke he felt not less weary but more exact. Bran came out of the cold with a face like a boy and a stare like a winter sky. He moved as a person moves who has had to learn his own body again and found that some of it will never be his as it was before. He held himself with a care that made Jon more careful with him, and at night, when the wind took hold of the corners of the castle and rattled them to see if they would come loose, Bran's eyes went oddly distant, as if a sound far or near had asked him to name it. He could finish Jon's sentences before Jon had half-formed them and sometimes would not look at him while doing it. Yet when he smiled, it was the smile of a boy who remembered what it felt like to run, and Jon loved him so much in those moments that he had to turn away to hide it. "The world is larger than we thought," Bran said, when the two of them sat in the God's Wood with the weirwood's face looking over them like an old white beard. "Not in miles. In attention." "You see it," Jon said. "You always did." "I see things I would rather not," Bran said, and then he put his hand flat to the root he sat upon and closed his eyes. Jon felt the air thicken. He felt the world gather itself like a lunge. When Bran opened his eyes, they were Bran's and not Bran's. The others are not a storm. They are a shape carved into the weather by something that prefers its letters to be exact. Your death tastes wrong to them. It tastes wrong to me as well, Jon said softly. They do not understand what you are, Bran said, and his gaze slid up the weirwood's trunk the way a man might look up a tower he meant to climb. They will try to. They will take you if they can. If you go among them to learn, do not go too far. Do you say that as my brother? Jon asked. Or as the thing you are also? As both, Bran said. It is not so easy to keep them apart. The part that is your brother remembers the place we hid under the kitchen steps to steal pies that were too hot to hold. The other part knows how the snow likes to lie when the wind sits in a certain quarter, and how the owls speak to one another when a fox is listening. He reached and put his hand on Jon's wrist. Listen to me. You will have to die again. I can feel it. But not because you can. Because you must, and because you will remember the way back this time and the next. But only because something in this world wants you to. Make sure you know what that something is. I thought I did, Jon said. He looked at the face carved into the white bark. He had knelt in this place as a boy and named the gods that lived in his heart without knowing he named them. Now he did not name them. He listened, and if a god spoke, it D so in a language he could not yet understand. The ravens from Eastwatch were clean lines of news and fear. Ed wrote with his usual cheerlessness brightened by observation. The sea was glass at noon and iron by night. The ice formed in sheets that drifted as if uncertain where they ought to go. There were lights sometimes in the north, not the dancing curtains of colors that had made children gasp and call it godwork, but a slow flicker in the sky without hue, like breath on polished steel. There were tracks along the shore that did not fill. A man had fallen from a parapet, not yet drunk on the hour, and his bone had snapped like a green stick and the break had not bled. I tell you it is wrong, Ed wrote, and not because I do not like it. Jon gathered men and sent them to the wall. He sent boys and girls too young for summer work to the cellars to learn flint and tinder. He sent old women who had cooked stew for 50 winters to teach men how to eat with one hand while the other held a weapon. He sent smiths to make blades and asked them to try odd things, to drill holes and fit pieces of dragon glass into iron like teeth, to fold into steel bits of glass ground to powder, to stitch leather over plates of obsidian like scales. Some of it failed after the first strike. Some of it clung together, mean and crude, but ready to bite. Dragonstone answered. The answer came with ships whose hulls were bright with salt and with men who moved like officers even when they held ropes in their hands. Tyrion Lannister came among them, reduced in size by travel and growing again the moment his feet touched land. He walked into Winterfell's hall with his mouth settled in a way that suggested he had already made 3 jokes in his head and chosen none of them. Lord Snow, he said, or shall I call you king in the north and duck? Call me Jon, Jon said, and I'll call you Tyrion. Between us we will have done enough with the rest. Tyrion's eyes took in the hall and the people inside in a sweep like a hand across a board. I come with well wishes from my queen, and with a harpy's handful of requests bound up in courtesies. I also bring obsidian enough to cut a new mouth into the giant if you wish, and men to haul it where you say. Your queen, Sansa said, from the chair at Jon's left. She had put on the look she wore for Southerners, a look that held the slightest curl of her lip, as if a smell offended her that she would not name. Come to conquer and to warm herself by our fires? To burn the north would be a poor way to win it, Tyrion said. And she is wise. She has been tutored by men who know what can be unlearned, and by failure, which is no one's servant and everyone's master. He bowed slightly to Jon. She would meet you if you would meet her, not to fence for power, though I would not insult you by pretending power will not be present in the room. To speak of the thing that comes. To make of this meeting something other than a tale told later about stubbornness. Jon thought of the ships that had come and of the dragons he had seen only as small scars on the sky in old tapestries. He had sworn no oaths to any queen of the south. His oath had been to a wall of ice and to men who stood upon it, and after that to a house whose name he had carried without complaint. We have need of your glass, he said. We have need of your dragons if they can be compelled to do what men ask of them. They are compelled only by what compels fire, Tyrion said. They know heat and they know hunger and they know where their mother's shadow falls. But they know the cold too. They do not love it. I think they will be of use where the air bites a little too hard. Jon met Daenerys at Dragonstone beneath a sky the color of slate. The castle rose from its rock like a thing grown there and not built, the mouths of its carved dragons opening onto the sea. He had not meant to kneel. He did not kneel. He stood with the salt in his hair and the long drip of rain off the edge of his cloak and told the woman who called herself queen what the north looked like when you were inside it and not looking at it from a map. He told her what he had seen beyond the wall and what his men had burned. He told her what he would give and what he would not. He did not tell her that he could die and come back again. He did not know how to say it in a way that would not become a bargaining chip in someone else's hand. She listened. She asked questions that were not clever but careful, which he liked. She judged him with eyes that did not dart. In the end, she nodded slowly. "The world is larger than my throne," she said, and he heard something honest in it. "You will take as much obsidian as you like. You will have ships to haul it. And when you ask for dragons, we will speak of it again. Dragons eat. The north is not generous with meat this season." She asked him to bend the knee. He did not. She did not order him dragged to the ground and made to taste the rock. He left with ships and men and promises that were not untrue. Tyrion came to the dock and put a hand on Jon's arm as he boarded. "She is a good queen in a world that is not good," he said. "If you are wise, you will like understanding her. If you are wise, you will not tell yourself that you have understood her after a week. Both can be true." When he returned to Winterfell, the news met him at the outer gate. Eastwatch had seen lights and shapes. The dead had come walking halfway down the beach and then turned back, leaving prints that shone under moonlight like oil. The men felt watched even when they were alone. Sometimes they turned their heads and saw nothing, and sometimes they saw a shape that was not a man and was not quite the absence of a man. Ed's letter was written with the ink blotted where a hand had been seized and the quill shoved up. "Come if you are coming, Jon," it said, the first time Ed had ever written his name without a title. "Bring fire." Jon brought fire, iron, and intention. He brought Tormund Giantsbane because a man should have a friend at his side when the world tries to take him, and because Tormund's laughter could scare off a fog. He brought men who would stand and not count. He brought Sansa's blessing, which he took as if it were a cloak, and Arya's bare whisper, delivered at his door one night without a footstep. "Don't be a fool." He did not have a chance to answer. She had gone again as if she had never been there. He thought for a moment he had dreamed it and then found the small nick in his belt where a blade had tested leather and not cut. They stood on the sea's edge at Eastwatch at dawn with the light pulling itself up slowly over a horizon that looked like a wound that had half healed. The waves were slow and the foam sluggish and thick as if it had died. Ed looked thinner and older and relieved in a tired way that did not show itself in his mouth. "There," he said, pointing with his chin. They came out of the mist like men walking into a barn. They stood and looked at the tower and then walked back into the mist again. That was all. "That is not all," Melisandre said. She had come with them to the wall as if she had been invited by the wind. She moved along the parapet and her eyes were far. "Something learns us. It tastes us and spits and tastes again." "Lovely," Ed said. "We are bites of stew." "They want me," Jon said. The words came and he did not try to stop them. "They have turned their heads when I have been near them. They have turned their heads when I have stepped away. They will not strike the wall when they can strike something that does not move." He looked at the men around him. "I will go out onto the shore and let them look their fill. And when they come close, I will die." Silence opened like a mouth. It shut at first. "I object," he said. "I object to the plan and to you, and especially to death." "It is mine," Jon said. "No one else's. I will go with a blade and a shield and wear mail because I will not confuse recklessness with purpose. When they come, I will meet them. When I fall, do not rush to me. Stand. Hold your fire and your fear. When they turn away, burn what they leave." Melisandre came to him later with the look of a woman who has had her heart broken and has not yet decided who to blame. "Do not treat life as a boat you can beach and then shove back into the water," she said. "Each time you leave, you take a little less with you when you return." "I know," Jon said. "Believe me, I know." He walked out onto the stones at the tide line with Ghost at his heel and Tormund 50 paces behind with men who would not run even if ordered. He held Longclaw in his right hand, and his left laid against the wood of a shield shaped like the doors of a hall he had once crept through as a boy. The sea breathed wet and slow. The mist came from nowhere as mist does, and was upon him in a moment, beating his lashes, settling in his beard, softening the world as if a finger had passed over it. They came like scribbles crossing a page. He saw the dead first, a press of bodies that were bodies only in the way a child's drawing is a face. Then the shapes behind and between them, tall and deliberate, blades at a tilt. He heard nothing from them and much from the sea. "Come on, then," he said, and his voice did not break. They came. The dead moved as if pulled on strings, graceful without grace. The first of them stumbled over a stone and did not fall because it did not know how. Jon cut it down with one clean blow and felt nothing where he should have felt pity or satisfaction. It fell and tried to rise and could not rise because the string had been cut. He moved forward, and the line moved backward, and for a moment the mist held its breath. Then another stepped forward. Jon had seen them near before, but not so near, with steel in his hand and his life like a coin he meant to spend. He saw the ice blades' saw-toothed shine. He saw his own face in its length, a pale ghost with dark hair and a softer mouth than the others deserved. He put his sword up, and when blade met blade the cold slid up his arm and held there like a hand. He pushed and the other gave and did not give, as if strength were a thing that had been made into several plates and stacked. The second cut broke the other's blade at the tip. The third broke it a third of the way down. The fourth met no blade at all. The other drew back and tilted its head, and Jon saw himself in that tilt also, the moment he had met a person who had told him something he had not enjoyed hearing. Then the other lowered itself as if kneeling, and that was the only warning he had. Cold ate him. It came up through his boots and into his bones, ran along his ribs and found the thread behind his left shoulder. He felt himself being called. It was not a question and not a demand. It was a note. He had known it before. He had followed it before. He could choose. He chose. He opened his hands and gave long enough to fall. Men shouted and held their ground because they had been told to. The dead shuffled forward and then stopped, confused at the absence of instruction. The other rose from its kneel and turned its head as if seeking a sound it remembered. Jon lay a small distance from himself, seeing the way his left hand twitched a fraction even in death because habits are slow to leave. He moved no farther than that fraction. He lay against the shore in a dead man's quiet and listened. The call changed. It doubled and doubled again until it was not one note but three. He felt them braid and pull. They wanted him bound. They wanted him taut. He pulled the other way, toward the red warmth he had learned to keep under his tongue. He was not strong enough to do it alone. A shape took hold of his face and held it where a face would be, pressed something rough and wet against his cheek, breathed into his mouth the rank warm stink of meat, and fur and winter breath. Ghost. The name was not a word. It was the shape of love. Jon grabbed the name like a rope and pulled. He came back wheezing salt and mist and his own spit. He rolled to his knees and retched hard and emptied nothing, as if emptiness itself were something to be rid of. Somebody hauled him up by a strap and somebody else shoved a blade into his hand, and when he lifted his head the others were moving back into the mist with the very smallest change in the way they carried themselves, as if the act of turning had taught them something about turning. They did not come again that day. The men burned the dead until their hands shook and their eyes stung, and then burned them more. Ed sat with his back against a wall and watched the sea as if it might do something surprising. Tormund laughed once, a flat sound, then rubbed his face and swore and told a story about a woman married to a bear, and no one told him to stop because the story filled the air with something that was not mist. Jon sat and stripped his mail and cleaned Longclaw and set each thing beside him in a careful row. He felt like a table set for a feast that had been postponed. Melisandre came and ran her fingers over the scars at his chest as if counting something in her head. "Do not do that again," she said in a voice so flat it was not scold but statement. "I will," Jon said, "but not for the same reason. I learned something. They cannot bear my death. Not fully. It does not fit. They will try to shape it. They cannot help themselves. But my thread goes away, theirs does not. You could teach yourself to go further, she said. I could, he said, and not come back. They pushed north with fire and glass and steel and the stubborn ugliness of men who had decided to be brave. They moved along the edge of the world and set small fires that made little sense except that they were lit. In the nights, Jon slept and woke and sometimes left his body a little and returned before Ghost could howl. Every time he found a way not to go too far. Every time he found it a hair harder. He knelt at a weirwood and asked it for something he could not name. He put his hand on the red-rimmed scar of its mouth and felt the tree's attention. He felt something old and not unkind notice him. He felt the way men feel when they find their way into a room they have not been invited to and are not thrown out. He marked the feeling and wore it like a token in a pocket. He did not call on it. He kept it as a last bread in a last satchel. The others did not mass and break. They drew and tested like a scribe trying pens before a long day. One night, under a sky tin-bright and endless, Jon died and let himself drift and found a place that was not a place where the cold was very pure and not cruel at all, where the blue threads of the other's attention braided and unbraided and made a net that stretched far beyond him. At the center of it he felt a still point. He did not go to it. He would go some other night. Meanwhile the living built things that were not walls, habits, words, expectations. They split dragonglass into arrowheads in a rhythm that made the sound of work into a lullaby. They taught boys to stand between two fires and men to stand on a stair and listen to the way the air moved when the night leaned. Sansa wrote letters that were knives wrapped in silk. Arya came out of the dark and went back into it, and the dark did not always like it. She killed a man for holding a girl's braid and calling it a rope, and when Jon looked at her, she looked back once and shrugged without explanation. Bran spoke sometimes as a boy, sometimes as a man who had forgotten whether his hands had once been warm. The world turned under a winter that did not let go. The South sent news the way the South always does, wrapped in cunning and coin and worry. Cersei Lannister took the throne she thought hers and set herself upon it like a cat on a lap that does not belong to it. Men died in ways that made sense only if you told yourself a kind of story that the North did not know how to tell. Daenerys Targaryen landed and lit fires in places where fire had never been entirely welcome. Jon thought of her sometimes in the moments before sleep, thought of the way she had used the word we and meant it, and wondered if there were a world where the South and North could be made to look one another in the face and see someone they recognized. Then he slept and woke and went to work, which is how most dreams are ended if you are lucky. At Long Lake, where the ice makes a long bright blade under the winter sun, they fought a battle that would be turned into a song with the wrong words. Jon arranged the line with Ed, set men with glass-tipped spears in the hollows and stout men with leathered shields on the ridges, put archers where the wind would take their arrows back if they saw fit to be unhelpful. He placed Tormund where the ground was treacherous, because Tormund's treachery would be the friend of any ground that spotted it. He told Sansa to stay at Winterfell. She told him that she would do as she pleased, and then did as he had asked, and sent him a letter with only 3 words in it. Be stoned, Jon. The dead came in a gray press, their ankles whispering on ice. The others came like the idea of winter made into men. They moved with that correct wrongness, and the light around them bent and made a faint ring, as if a halo could grow in winter. Jon felt them reach, and he stepped out of himself once, twice, to taste their reach and step back in time for his foot to come down where it ought. He gave his men a word or a glance, and they stiffened there and loosened here. When the world tipped on its axis and he felt the moment that would be sung arrive, he did the thing he had not yet done. He took fire with him. He died quickly, a spear punched up under his ribs with elegant precision. He had chosen the man he let kill. Elhim, a carpentered thing with deer hide over his shoulders. He fell with his face to the sky and let the world go. Usually, he slipped out clean, and the place where his warmth had been remembered it like a smile. This time, he carried a coal in with him. It was not a picture or a word. It was a habit, the smallest habit he had left, the habit of refusing to die all the way. He let it sit where he was not and watched. The others saw him, or whatever seeing is to them. They reached to shape his departure and found the ember at the center, and the logic that made them exact did not know what to do with that heat. Pressed, he let it, The ember grew. For an instant that had no measure because this place did not count, he was hot. He was very hot in a way that had nothing to do with pain and everything to do with remembering being a child pressed to a kitchen wall to feel the warmth of the oven leak through. Laughing because the place outside the oven could give heat like a trick. The net of attention around him popped in a dozen spots so quietly it was loud. He heard the sea. He heard himself breathe. He heard Ghost howl, though Ghost was not near. He came back as if the world had taken hold of his collar and yanked. He rolled sideways and vomited bile and ice. His hand found Longclaw where it had fallen half under a heel, and he dragged himself to his feet. Around him, the dead stuttered. They had been walking as if they remembered walk. Now they stood as if they remembered standing. The others had turned ever so slightly, like dogs who have found a new scent. Jon raised his sword. Men saw him do it and shouted without hearing their own noise. After, they told the story the way such stories are told. A single bright act, a single bright hero, victory and losses both cut to a shape that satisfies a mouth. Jon himself remembered the way and others' head came away under Longclaw's bite, as if that was not what steel ought to cut. He remembered the smell of the ice at the back of his throat and the way the light looked on the frozen lake, a flat, sincere light like a boy's gaze. He remembered Tormund roaring with a laugh that turned into rage and back into laughter again as he chopped at a thing that had once been a woman who had once braided a girl's hair. He remembered Ed at his shoulder, calm as a stone being rained upon. He remembered the moment the dead broke and the living did not chase because they had been told not to, because chasing the dead is like chasing a shadow. A use for the legs and nothing for the lungs. They won. The way that is said makes it sound clean. It was not clean. The wounded were many. The dead were more. The fire burned all night and the next day and the day after that. Jon walked through the camp as men slept like bundles and women sat and made slow work out of washing a boy's face where he had gotten blood up into his eyebrows. He felt old and precise and dull and alive. And he felt something else. The thinnest lightning of a pressure he had not known he carried. As if a stone had been taken from his pocket without his noticing. And now the coat sat a fraction easier on his shoulders. He did not let himself enjoy it. He set it aside. He put bowls in hands and hands on tasks and tasks into order, which is an old art and a hard one. He dreamed that night of his father's face. It was not a dream that was not a dream. It was a dream that felt like a dream and yet left a taste in his mouth when he woke that was not the taste of ordinary sleep. Ned Stark looked at him with the gaze that had made boys straighten their spines. He said nothing for a long time. Then, "Hold." "I am," Jon said in the dream. "I will." "Hold," Ned said again, and then his mouth twitched into the smallest smile. "And let go when you must." Jon woke with his hand clenched on Ghost's ruff and his throat sore with the noise he had made without knowing it. He loosened his hand. Ghost put his tongue on Jon's knuckles and that was that. The seasons did what they do. They held their ground and then changed because everything changes. The winter did not soften so much as it moved in its weight, redistributed itself as a careful thing redistributes coins in a purse. The others drew back. They drew back not in a retreat but in what felt like. Jon could not find a word for it. A reconsideration. The world had learned something that day on the lake, and so had the cold beyond. They would learn more. Word came from the south. Cersei had done something clever and monstrous. Daenerys had done something brave and foolish. Jaime Lannister had ridden in the rain and not found what he sought. Tyrion sent a scrap of parchment that held only 4 words. "We are still here." That was both truism and prayer, and Jon read it as both. Sansa ruled the North well. She made men come to her who did not want to come, and made men do for her what they had thought to do for themselves first. She wrote to lords with words that were doors. If you walked into them, you found yourself in a room where you wanted what she wanted. She did not marry, and when men asked her why, she told each man a different truth, which is the way to tell truth to men who need it. Arya came and went and frightened those who needed frightening. Bran stayed mostly in the Godswood, speaking with things that had no tongues and answering questions no one had asked. He sat with the weirwood and the white of it looked white and not like bone, which pleased Jon in a small way he did not talk about. Jon learned to die carefully, which is not a sentence men mean when they say it. He learned to find the thread under his shoulder and pinch it not like a boy in a game but like a man who cuts cloth only when he has measured twice. He learned to carry a little heat into the cold and to let it sit without feeding it until it hurt him, and then to let it go. He learned to be watched by the others and not answer their watching with movement. He learned to be feared by his own men not because of what he might do to them but because of what he could do and did not do. He learned to come back slower and to accept that slowness which was the hard learning. When Daenerys came north at last, she came on dragonback. The sound the dragons made over the dark pines was like a sail tearing and mending at once. The fires in the camp that night were larger because people could not help themselves. They had seen something that made them want light. She walked into the circle of warmth with her hair braided with silver and her face set to stand whatever cold it had to. Jon bowed. He did not kneel. She looked at him and at the men around him and at the glass points lying in their neat rows, and then she looked at the wall in the far distance, which was a line of darker night against the sky. "I know you have work to do," she said. "I came to see it and to ask one thing." "What will you ask?" Jon said. "That when it is done, if it is ever done, you will come with me to the south for a little while, and sit in a hall where the roof leaks when it rains and the stew is too thin and the songs are not very good, and tell me how to make a country of men who do not want to be made into anything." She smiled with just the top of her mouth. "It might be a long story. I don't know if it will ever be done," Jon said. He said it without self-pity. "But if there is a day when a man can sit and complain about stew without being a fool, I will come and complain beside you." They did not speak of love. They did not make pledges they could not keep. She left him with dragons in the sky for 2 nights and then took 2 away, leaving one to cast its shadow over their fires. Men looked up at it as if seeing a god, then looked away because if it was a god, its godhood would not keep a man from being burned. The end, when it came, was not an end. It was a line written in the snow that did not melt. It happened far in the north where the wind had a voice like an old man telling a story. Jon went up onto a ridge with Ghost and 1 man and 1 woman beside him, both of whom had stood with him when men had called him a boy. He looked down into a hollow where the snow lay in a curve and the sky lay close. The others had made a circle there. In the center of it was that still point he had felt before, the place where the net nodded. He had not gone to it. He went now. He died on the lip of the hollow. He did not make it dramatic. He put Longclaw down gently, fell to his knees, whispered Ghost's name, felt the press of a muzzle at his ear, and let go. The fall was quick and kind. The cold received him as if it had been expecting him at this hour and had prepared the chair he liked by the fire. He moved without moving into the circle and stood where the still point was. There was no being there and there was all being there. A logic, a longing, a habit as deep as stone. He felt the oldness of it. He felt the way it had been said a long time ago, when men had called years by different names and known the names of stars that had died since. He felt how it pulled at movement and asked it to become stillness, how it pulled at heat and asked it to consider being order. He felt how his own thread had been woven too recently to fit neatly anywhere here. He took the ember he had brought and did not put it in the center of the knot. He put it to the side where the knot's tail was. He let it sit without forcing it and waited. For a time without measure he waited. The knot considered him. It learned him. It learned the way he would not become what it wanted. It learned what he would allow. It did not break. It eased. The attention of the others shifted a hair. Their blades hummed a different note. The net did not tear. He was not foolish enough to think it would. It loosened enough for wind to pass. He took that as all the victory he could ask. He drew himself back along the thread and did not hurry. He came back into his body with so little eagerness that he half expected not to find it. It had waited for him politely. He took breath. The first breath hurt. The second one did not. He stood. The circle below unmade itself without hurry or fuss. The others moved away like men who have finished their work for the day and will begin again in the morning. The dead fell and stayed fallen. Ghost stood with his mouth open and his tongue out, looking like a dog for once. Jon went down into the hollow and stood in the place where he had stood when he had not been standing there. He felt it under his feet like a memory of cold. He bent and picked up a shard of something from the snow. It was a bit of an other's blade, broken with an edge as dull as glass that has been tumbled in the sea. He put it in his pouch. When he came back to his men, the woman looked at him and then looked away and then looked back because she could not decide which was ruder. "Is it done?" she said. "No," Jon said. "Nothing is ever done. We made a little space. That's all." "A space for what?" the man asked. "For us," Jon said. "For the living." The winter softened after that by its standards. It settled into its cold like a man into an old cloak. The others did not press. They did not jest. They did not make signs from afar. They were simply not where the living needed to be, which was what mercy looks like in some seasons. Men went about mending and marrying and burying and regretting and being proud, which are the things men do even under a sky that still fears to rain. Daenerys went south with her dragons and her ships and her hunger and her wisdom and her errors. Tyrion wrote 2 more letters with fewer jokes each time. Cersei made a plan. Sansa made 10 plans and 2 were better than Cersei's. Arya crossed a river and did not pay a man because she had paid him once already by letting him live. Bran learned how to listen without falling asleep. Jon stayed. That was the choice underneath all the clev. He stayed at the wall and then beyond it and then at Winterfell and then in the woods and then wherever a man needed to stand and be looked at by the dark. He died sometimes with purpose. He did it less, not more. He came back more slowly each time. He married no one. He fathered no children that he knew, though once a boy of 10 looked at him with a particular stubbornness and Jon felt a tug at his heart that had nothing to do with oaths. Sansa's hair went white one streak at a time and then all at once, like snow deciding on a roof. She wrote to him long after she put down her seal, and he read her letters not because of the words but because of the shape her hand made. Arya came one night and slept sitting up with her back against his door, and in the morning she had left a sprig of something that smelled like a story. He counted years by winters and winters by the number of times he had lit a fire while thinking of nothing at all. He learned to move quietly with ghosts through trees that had names and trees that did not. He learned the cries of owls. He learned the way ice cracks, how it sounds when it is unhappy, how it sounds when it is singing to itself. He learned to listen to the godswood until it told him something small and then something a bit larger and then something nothing at all like words. He learned that there are sacrifices that do not look like sacrifices and gifts that do not look like gifts. Children grew into men and women who had no memory of a life before someone called Jon Snow stood at the border of the world and did not move. They told stories about him that embarrassed him when he overheard them. How he had wrestled a bear made of ice. How he had walked into the sea and come out a week later holding what he had gone in to fetch. He did not correct the stories. He knew they were for the living. He knew too what it was to need a man halfway larger than a man to believe in for a night. Once he went south in answer to a letter written in a hand he did not recognize. He went to King's Landing and it did not burn him to breathe there. The city's smell was a blow and he took it. He walked into a hall where the roof leaked a little when it rained and the stew was too thin and the songs were not very good, and a woman with hair the color of old ash sat on a chair that had cut many backs. She looked at him as if looking into a mirror that showed you your best self and your worst in the same glass. He sat with her and talked of coasts and of the way the snow betrayed secrets and of how to hold men by their better habits. He did not stay long. On the last morning, Tyrion stood with him at a window looking down at a street where a girl with a fruit cart had stopped a boy from stealing an apple by giving him a pear. "We are still here," Tyrion said. "Yes," Jon said. "Is it any better?" "It is any," Jon said. He went north again. He went because he was tied to it by the thread behind his left shoulder, and because he had chosen to be tied to it, and because the north had put its hand on his throat and never quite taken it away. When he stood on a rise and looked out over the plain where the snow always fell in lines, he felt the attention of the cold pass over him, the way a hand passes over a blanket to smooth it. It did not stop. It did not press. It did not see him as a thing that had moved. He was a complaint it had learned to live with. He died once more beyond the wall, alone with Ghost and the low, careful stars. He did it because there was a knot in the net that had tightened in a way he did not like. He went out of himself and found the knot and put his ember to it and waited. He was patient this time, the way stone is patient. When he came back, it was late afternoon and the light had the yellow of old butter. He lay with his head on Ghost's flank and watched breath float. A ptarmigan came and stood on a bush and looked at him with scorn. "You are not much," the bird's gaze said, and he nodded. He did not argue with birds. Sansa died in her bed with her shoes on because she had found that amusing when she was 60 and did not care about what people think of shoes on carpets. Arya died somewhere no one could name. Bran did not die, or if he did, he died in a way that made the weirwood shiver once and then stand more still than before. Davos died with a curse and a prayer on the same line of his mouth and his hand on a boy's head, which is as fine a way as many. Melisandre walked into a snow that fell in thick privacy and did not come out again. Ed sat down at a table to write a letter and never wrote it. Jon did not die, not finally. He did not because he could not, and also because he would not. He came to understand that his life was not a thing he possessed so much as a passage he kept open. He was a door. He made himself a door a person could walk through to the other side where the fire was. He guarded that door. He learned that there are worse things to be. In his last remembering of winter, the children ran on the ice with the careful recklessness of people who have been taught the properties of cold and are testing them as good students test all things. They had the look of small wolves and the laugh of crows and the stubbornness of people born to a place that shakes its head and makes you make your bed in it anyway. They told stories of a king in the north who never took a crown and whose sword was blue with frost and whose eyes burned. They argued about whether he had been a man once or had always been a story. Jon heard them and smiled. He did not show his teeth. He did not stop them that day and say, "I am that man and I am not that man." He did not step into their circle and show them the scar on his chest that had snow in it like a cold coin. If he had, it would have been for his own sake and not for theirs, and he had learned long ago the difference between those two. He walked back to the God's Wood at Winterfell with Ghost at his side and a piece of an other's blade in his pouch worn smooth as the idea of winter. He put his hand on the weirwood and felt it notice him as always. He let the cold pass over him and did not shiver. He stood until the light went, and then he stood longer because sometimes standing longer is the only thing that makes a difference. When the stars came out, they came out one by one with the proper patience. Jon counted them until the counting no longer felt like numbers but like a habit of attention. He breathed in. He breathed out. He held. He released. He welcomed the door and he closed the door. The night leaned in to see if it could move him. He did not move. He would when it was time. Until then, he stood, as men do who have decided what they are for.